So we're live.
We are live.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Terry, and this is not Dr. Kevin. And today we're going to be discussing conflict, specifically conflict with your clients, customers, whoever you're serving, because it can be quite uncomfortable to deal with, and it can be, a bit of ramifications if not dealt with properly. So Terry's going to share some insight on what that can look like, and I'm going to share some experience that we've had in dealing with it, personal experience last year, and hopefully some of you folks can relate to that and learn from it. So,
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is we have conflict with clients, but we have conflict with teammates. We have conflict with partners. There's conflict everywhere because, in fact, I have conflict with myself because I have one way of thinking about things, and then I got emotions that actually counteract that or betray myself. And if I'm doing it with myself, then anybody else around is just multiplying the ability to have conflict or have disagreement. And so what happens in conflict, the funniest thing and I've watched it for years, is once we start to have conflict, or once we start to have some kind of fear going on that might not be conscious, but we just believe a different way than the other person, we start to push our power and we start to try to get our way. And we don't necessarily know we're doing it. And in fact, a lot of people are very, very good at trying to convince somebody or explain themselves into the right side of the argument. And that's where a lot of problems happen, because we start to push power. And whoever, they say this in sales, is whoever has the most convincing argument wins. But do we really win? And so, Kevin, I want you to talk a little bit about your client last year that we were working with, and how you were working through it. And before you actually were working through it, what started to happen with your team, and what started to happen with your side of the information as they were pushing their power?
Yeah, so we had a client last year. They were doing this a large remodel, and they were going to be moving into this home. It was a home they recently purchased. They were going to be moving into, and ultimately, while we were doing what we were supposed to do on our end, they were particularly a little over. What's a good word?
Just say
They
it.
were.
Say it. Well,
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, overly detail oriented. Like they were looking for, like, when you bring on like a contractor or any professional, like, you're not going to be asking. There's a level of trust that you're going to have with them. So you're not going to be asking every little nuanced detail. Like if you're getting surgery, you're on an open heart, you're having open heart surgery, or a family member is, you're not going to be like, oh, so where does the aorta go? If you're not going to be asking about like the details of what, that don't really pertain to the final result, so to speak.
what size stitching are you going to use when you're sewing this up?
Exactly. So we kind of ran into that situation where they wanted, and it was like needless detail, right? It was kind of delaying things, and ultimately, this client, they were living in a hotel, and not at that point, but at a couple months into the project, they moved into a hotel. They were spending a lot of money staying there, so they felt the pressure from that. But at the same time, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted us to get the job done really, really fast, but they also wanted to ask and question every single detail along the way. So it kind of put us in this tight spot. And what ended up happening was, I work. My business partners are Vinny and Tyler. In this particular case, we were working with Vinny on the project, and he was overseeing it as production. And they were pretty much, they weren't a fan of what Vinny was telling them in regards to, like, we have to do things in a certain way to get the result, regardless of, we appreciate the situation you're in, but we're doing what we can. And they didn't like that answer. So what they would do is they'd circumvent him. They'd come to me, and I'm not, just to preface this, I'm not particularly engaged with the day-to-day operations. I'm very eagle-eye view. So like that's really Vinny's role as production manager, is to oversee the project managers. To, you know, he oversees what's going on in the day-to-day. And even Vinny doesn't know the exact day-to-day. The project managers know the exact day-to-day. So there's just levels to it. And ultimately, our clients kind of, they were like, oh, well, we didn't like what mom says, so now we're going to ask dad, kind of thing. That's like really what it reminded me of. And so they talked to me, and you know, and I'm a little more, you know, I didn't understand the full details of the situation, and you know, my natural instinct is to try and resolve it. I'm a very diplomatic kind of person, sometimes to a fault, which, you know, we could probably talk about, you know, establishing boundaries, but ultimately we got into a situation where, you know, it frustrated Vinny a little bit, because unbeknownst to me, it kind of turned me a little bit towards Vinny. Like, I wouldn't say like against, you know, I didn't go fall deep into it, but it is worth noting, like, that kind of situation can really explode. And that's how, like, if you have managing partners, this can be detrimental. And like Terry said, this is like it's like a game of power, right? And by trying to split the owners and turn them in on each other, you know, the third party, and I'm not saying they were doing this on purpose, but that's kind of what ends up happening. You know, it can give the client or the other party much more power than they should have. And while they think they're getting what they want, really what they want, like we talked about, you know, really what they want is, sometimes they need tough love. Sometimes they need that guidance. They want to be guided. So it's not the answer to solving your clients. So basically, in a weird way, the answer to solving your clients' problems isn't always solving your clients' problems.
Right. And how I'd put that in is, the idea is, and this isn't just clients, this is everybody. Everybody does
Right.
this. We push our power to see if the other person will give in. And as the other person gives in, we start to lose trust for them. Because if I can make you do something I want you to do, now I don't trust that either you know what you're doing, or that you have a solid plan, or that what you were thinking is right, because you've abandoned your plan for mine. And so if I'm like, hey, I think it should be this way, one of the problems, the biggest problem, is that I end up being the builder of my program or builder of my house or whatever. I'm the project manager all of a sudden, and I don't know how to build a house. So I just took over the project. But on the other level is, I didn't allow you guys in this situation to do the job that you were supposed to be doing in the first place. I undermined it by doing the separation of the two of you. And what we call that is splitting. And in psychology, we split the two people that are knowing what's going on. And so I'm going to talk about a few tips on how to keep that from happening in a partnership and in more than a one-on-one kind of situation, because it's super important. But the other underlying thing that we got to look at when people are doing that is, they're not doing it because they're mean. They're not doing it to get over on people. There is no toxicity in this. And man, I hear a lot about people talking about toxic bosses and toxic employees and toxic buildings. And, you know, there's so much toxicity out there that I don't think we should be able to survive the way we talk about it. And it's not toxic people. It's, we are attempting to get what we think is a need met when we're not aware of what's going on emotionally. And so, and by the way, I hate to break this to you, but everybody that thinks we can separate emotion and business, or emotion and thinking, it's impossible. It's impossible, because we're emotional beings that think, and our thinking explains what we're experiencing emotionally without allowing us to know what's going on with ourselves emotionally. And so when you kind of get that, and that's a lot to take in. So I want you guys to sit with that for just a second. Your chair goes. But so when this is happening, people are not aware. People are not aware that they're pushing their power. They actually think a lot of times that they're either going to be taken advantage of, and they're in scarcity and they're frightened, or they're wanting to make sure that they're clear with what they really want and don't think that other people are listening. And so they lie to themselves about what's really going on in the real world. But if we step back and look at it, they're actually expressing emotion through the conversation. And if we don't hold our boundaries and we're not solid, and I don't mean hold our boundaries by saying you can't do that to me, but hey, when you start putting pressure on us, we start having problems with what's going on in our system. And so I think you're feeling pressure, and we need to talk about that pressure. That's holding a boundary.
It's like an authoritative approach versus authoritarian.
Yes. And what Kevin said is very important because people confuse those. Authoritative is, I know what I'm doing. I can help you understand it. I can be empathic and bring you along the thought process and the emotional process at the same time. Authoritarian is, I'm going to tell you what to do, and this is how it's going to be. And authoritarian is very power pushing.
Right.
Authoritative is very empowering. And we want to empower people to be able to really, one, calm down, two, let their emotions out. And we want to empower them to be able to think clearly without being emotionally triggered. And this is what really happens in most negotiations. The one that's less triggered wins. The one that is able to help the other person to regulate their emotion the best has the ability to influence the most. And what people do when they're not able to regulate their own emotion is they either push power or they get pushed by power. Because if I'm on the other end of it and somebody's pushing power with me, but I can't identify my emotions, I start to feel really shameful. I start to feel like I messed up. I start to feel like I'm inferior. I start to feel powerless. So I start giving in to them and I start doing what they want so that they're happy. And then what that does is it creates a black hole of me giving up and compromising myself, my strategy, my plan for them to be happy, instead of saying, this is the plan. I can see that you're feeling pressure. I can see that you're feeling disappointed. I can see that you're feeling disconnected from what we've been talking about. But when we can go back to the emotion and help them identify it, it relieves that pressure from them. And they can actually see it in a different way. And we can, instead of pushing power, we can all become empowered to work together.
Agreed. Yeah, I think, and it's a delicate dance sometimes too, because I know, at least for myself, I have the habit of, when things go wrong or like there's conflict, like my initial reaction is to just kind of steamroll through it and just solve everything, whatever it takes. And you made a good point, because I spoke with Terry about this before. When the clients came to me, I just I was calling the shots, kind of being like, all right, this is how we're going to solve it, bullet point list, that kind of thing. And I did run it by my team and everything, but Terry made a really good point, that there's an underlying issue here. It's not just about solving the problem, but helping them understand your side, because there should be understanding on both sides. And but by also not allowing yourself to be split, like Terry was mentioning, that can help with that situation. Because what ends up happening is, like, they may be telling me one thing and telling Vinny another thing. And if me and Vinny aren't communicating properly, it could turn into some Game of Thrones shit. Like, if anybody's familiar with that show, it's like
Absolutely
political, like,
hammers at 10 paces. And we or nail guns, we both start firing each other.
Right.
And the reality is this is not something that is malicious, and people aren't doing it on purpose. They're doing it to control their own emotions, but they try to control other people by trying to control their emotions, and they don't realize that's happening. And the story in the person's head is that I want to be taken advantage of, or these guys don't understand what I'm doing, or these guys are slacking off, or you can't find good help. And I mean, we've talked about that with, I can't find good people to help. that's the same kind of idea. Is
Right.
we've told ourselves a story, but we haven't been very clear about things, and we've been triggered, and so all of a sudden there's no good help out there. There's you can't find a good partner, and the reality is there's emotion under all of this stuff, and we don't even know it. And so what do? We got to go back to going, what's going on with us? How do we center ourselves around it? And I was talking to I was in a group last night with my friend Ken Walls. He runs the group. It's an amazing group. If you ever want to understand how to actually have a go live series or live streams and stuff, Ken Walls is the guy to talk to if you want to
Shout out Ken Walls.
Shout out Ken Walls. But in that group, we were talking about the idea of this emotional reset. And a guy named Glenn in that group, Glenn Morshower, you might have heard his name before, but he was talking about that we all need to take timeouts. And it's like an emotional shower. You wouldn't go in and, after a hard workout and go and sweat over all of your friends. But that's kind of what we do if we're triggered and we go into a conversation. And so what you want to do is you want to take an emotional shower. You want to clean those emotions off and then go in emotionally balanced or clean, right? The way I describe that is I have a process that I teach people how to identify their emotions that overwhelm them, let them go, and then you can go into any situation very simply balanced, intentional, being able to read the room much better, being able to understand what your own thinking is, and being able to hear when you start getting or feel when you start getting triggered, and be able to identify those emotions and let them go again, kind of like washing your hands over and over. And so rinsing, repeating, and letting go of that emotion as you're getting triggered allows us to be much more balanced in the interaction. And when we can do that, we're serving our client better, we're serving ourselves better, we're serving our team better. But it all comes back to we have to be able to be okay with ourselves to enter the conflict and to really understand that no matter what's going to happen, there's going to be conflict because we have conflict within us. They have conflict within them. And the more people we have, there's more conflict. And all that means is a lack of understanding and a lack of agreement and a lack of alignment until we have the conversation. But people think, oh my God, I avoid conflict. I want conflict. If you avoid conflict, you're going to have a whole lot more of it in your life.
100%.
Until you can be okay with it, identify it, walk through it, you're going to live inundated with conflict.
And I think it's worth noting too, something that I've realized as somebody that I'm not always the biggest fan of conflict. And one thing that I've kind of come to terms with too is like when you're like facing conflict doesn't mean you have to have more conflict. And I think there's a misnomer in people's minds that to face conflict is some kind of fiery solution. Like you have to almost delve into it like further. Like, all right, if we're gonna solve this conflict, we got to have a huge argument.
Yeah.
And that's really not the case, especially if you do it right. A lot of times, at least in my experience, it's always been easier to work with than I would have thought otherwise. Like it's usually a lot less fiery if you do it properly.
Absolutely. And I always talk about, and when I'm coaching people or when I'm consulting to a team, and especially the bigger teams that have a lot riding on it, when we're in those huge engagements with a bigger business, I really nail home with them this idea of place. And place stands for playful. And I don't mean playful with them, but playful with the situation, playful about myself, not taking myself too seriously, loving, which is really meaning really understanding and empathizing with the fact that and having compassion for everybody not being on the same page, and understanding that everybody has emotions and they're all triggered all the time. And then so that's PLA is accepting that we're not in agreement right now, or we're not aligned right now. Curious, and curious is huge, because the more curious we can be, the more open to listening we are with other people. And then empathic is really being able to identify the emotions that they're experiencing, being able to identify our own emotions. And when we use place and come from an attitude of place, what we're really doing is we're being present with the other person in that place at that time to help them to regulate their emotions and be more communicative in a healthy way.
What was the L again?
Loving.
Loving. Okay.
Funny you forgot that one. Just kidding. But yeah, and you know, and people love doesn't belong in business. Yes, it does.
Love doesn't belong.
Emotion doesn't belong in business. Love doesn't belong in business. You can't say it. You gotta come from that place, because you gotta realize that compassion is really all about understanding that other person sometimes isn't okay inside their head, inside their emotions, inside their situation, and we can give them room to have those hiccups or have those blow ups or have those situations, have the self-pitying moments, have the anxiety moments. And it doesn't mean that we've caused it or we're going to solve it, but we can be there with them and witness it and talk about it and help them to identify the emotions in it. And that's compassionate, because I mean, it's just the same as if a baby falls down, you don't laugh at the baby. I mean, maybe we do. I kind of laugh at it, but we're concerned for their welfare. That's compassion. And when we're concerned for their welfare, they experience that. And when we can be concerned for their welfare, we can help them make a change. So we can be the change agent by being the emotionally balanced person and using place to be curious, to be loving, to be accepting that they're having a moment, whatever the moment might be. We can make fun of ourselves if we get all agitated. And then, more than anything, be empathic and being able to identify the emotions that are being triggered. Another little tip is, if you have emotions going on and you're feeling powerless and you're feeling disconnected and you're feeling inferior in some way, so are they, because we feel what the other person feels. We trigger what we're feeling. We trigger it in the other person. And so if I'm feeling stupid, I can bet that they're probably feeling a little stupid too. But if we don't admit it, they can't admit it, depending. Now, if I'm the one that's more triggered and they notice it, they can help me to calm down. And so it goes back and forth. And in my relationship, in my business, Generator Consulting, with Christine, sometimes she's triggered, sometimes I'm triggered. But we both have been doing this long enough that we can step back and go, wow, it seems like when I'm doing what you're doing right now, I'm feeling this. I wonder if you are. And when we can check in with each other, we eliminate the unhealthy conflict, but we can still have the healthy conflict and come to some kind of understanding or agreement about what's really going on in the business, in our life, in our decisions, whatever it is. But we got to be able to really appreciate the other person's experience without having to push our power.
So it's almost like conflict creates harmony.
That's a good way to put it, you know, and funny, because Kevin and I have talked a lot about the temptations of the human being and the 5 dysfunctions of a team. We work a lot with that. And one of the temptations is harmony over conflict. We go for harmony over conflict. But as Kevin, you just said, the reality is we can only get to harmony through conflict. And so 100%, we have to allow ourselves to have the conflict to have true harmony. We can have artificial harmony all we want, and that all that is avoiding conflict.
So it's like conflict creates harmony, and harmony creates conflict in a way.
That's an oxymoron, and it's true. It's true. So yeah, really look at what's going on with your business, what's going on with your team, what's going on with your interactions with your clients, and you know, I'll say right now that if this is resonating with you, whether you're watching live, and if you're watching live, share this out. We appreciate it. And if you're rewatching it, share it out to people who you think could find value to it, and hashtag shared in the comments. We appreciate it. But when you do this, you start to really realize and resonate with the idea that I actually have a whole lot more ability to influence when I'm identifying what's going on and I'm connecting with the people instead of pushing power.
Right. Yeah. Like navigating conflict is huge. And this is one of the benefits, the huge benefits of having a coach, right? Because sometimes you may not even, you may be experiencing an issue you don't even see yet. You think a problem solved and it's not. And that's kind of the benefit of having whatever you want to call it, whether it's a coach, outside counsel. That's what Terry does for me. So I, highly recommend, if you have a business, getting somebody like Terry involved as your counsel, because shameless plug, but it's true, because this is one of the biggest values of having somebody like you on our team is that, while we think everything's fine, the dust is settling, there's a freaking hurricane coming, and you're kind of like, hey, by the way, like this, there's actually a larger issue here, or it could be, or just even letting us know that there could have been. Like the instance I was talking about, like it didn't explode into anything because, my natural tendency, I did kind of navigate it okay, but it's worth noting the potential of something like that exploding, and it helps you too, because as you're growing an organization, you're going to be dealing with more and more interpersonal conflicts, because ultimately the levels grow.
I gotta say that the other thing is it didn't blow up the way it could have, because you had been working with me for a number of months already,
That
and
too,
we had
right.
already talked about this stuff, and you had already learned about some of this stuff in your real estate negotiations.
Right.
To be able to understand that they're having emotional experiences, and when you identify those, they actually do better for themselves and in the deal. And so you already had that. If somebody doesn't have that, or
Right.
or they think that they do but they're not sure, that's where the problems happen. And over and over and over, I see that. And you think about the deal that you were talking about, $100,000 remodel or $200,000 remodel. If you lose that because they start to not trust you because you break your boundaries, and what I mean by that is you break your structure for them, so you appease them, but then they lose faith in you. That is a major hole in your business. And the bigger the deal, the more important it is to know this stuff and to be able to actually understand the underpinnings of the emotional turbulence that's going on. And, when I'm working with people, you can drastically see before and after how the difference is working emotionally versus working in this mindset, cognitive, logical sense, because logic doesn't work over emotion. Emotion
100%.
always wins, and then we explain it logically, and we usually explain it by saying they were jerks.
Logic justifies emotion.
Absolutely.
All
So I
right.
think we've hit this one pretty good out.
Yeah, this was a good one. Appreciate everybody tuning in, watching us. If there's any topics, if you guys, anybody that made it to the end, if there's any topics that you guys are interested in, or we're all ears, let us know. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, and remember, Thursday, 12 Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern. We're doing our best to be on that time all the time. Sometimes Kevin has something getting in the way. I might have something.
We're gonna be on here at least once a week. If the time may alter, like today's Friday, and I had to cancel yesterday. But we're gonna be on here at least once a week, and we're here to help. So.
And when Kevin can't make it, he's going to make it another day, like he said. But I'm going to be here 12 o'clock every Thursday. I may have a guest. I may have Christine. She showed up yesterday. And so tune in. We want to help out. We want to share with you guys. And we'll see you next time.